Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell is allegedly a book about communication, specifically about the trust-first approach that most people seem to have, and that's a good thing. To me, it looks like a critical indictment of the American police force's ability to read people and justify the appropriateness of their responses in a logical way. But let's stick to the core of this book first. One of the core ideas is that humans are truth-focused. When given a test to determine a lie versus the truth, most CIA agents and judges, when given 22 liars and 22 truth-tellers in a controlled environment, tended to only be able to tell the liar from the truth-teller 54% of the time. That is slightly better than luck, enough that it's statistically significant. But that's not very good for trained professionals. This is actually so bad that they have found evidence that there are spies within CIA that have not been caught for several years who are not very good at acting. In fact, they were fairly obvious about what they were doing, and terrible actors. But the people in the CIA felt like they needed the evidence to convict them, really before they started being suspicious of them. And that was a dangerous mentality to have in that organization. This is because, statistically, humans trust one another. They trust that the thing coming out of the other person's mouth is the truth, unless there is sufficient evidence to make it look like horse manure. This is because, statistically, it looks like humans are wired to detect truth more than we are wired to detect lies. We assume that what is coming out of the other person's mouth is the truth unless we have compelling reason to disbelieve it. This is actually a fundamental idea on how society works. We are more likely to give people the benefit of the doubt instead of assuming the worst of them until they prove otherwise. This is apparently a natural inclination despite what we say, except in some people. There are some people who are trained to look for hostility, deception, or wrongdoing and make others prove that they are speaking the truth. A lot of stock traders oddly seem to fit into this category. Another group of people who are trained to do this is the police, because they go from car to car and look for hostility. However, this wasn't always the case. In fact, this is a very recent change. It changed, I believe it was in Detroit, when a lot of police officers were noticing the high crime wave. They hired a criminologist there in order to see what could be done about it. They tried sending out police cars everywhere with little avail. The criminologist said, go to the worst neighborhoods, the ones that were already laden with gangs, and be aggressive about it. Use traffic laws in order to get an excuse to look in their car. If you are seen doing something, you can gather evidence to further arrest and make it more public. This worked. This worked really well. The crime rate dropped to about 20% in those areas, which is astounding. It worked so well that they started to spread to other areas that were not gang-ridden. The criminologist warned against this because he said while it probably would improve the crime statistics, it would have social costs. The only reason why he recommended it in the gang areas was because the act of disrupting people who were already statistically against the law is better than interrupting the business of a university student or a businessman and writing up a bunch of citations and tickets that makes people angry at the police. And getting police looking into little details as though they're hostilities just pisses people off. But the statistics did improve, and enough other cities wanted to see what the police were doing and wanted to imitate it themselves. So it began to spread. It was right around this time that a lot more black people started dying to policemen. Now, I might be misreading the signals, but it looks like they done screwed up. So, Malcolm Gladwell looked to see if they were justified. He looked into their way of profiling people, their way of looking into reading faces, their idea about transparency, their decisions on when to fire, and he found some surprising results. First, he found that people usually respond in something like 0.2 seconds if they think they're being threatened, and the stress parts of our brain make us make decisions really quickly before analyzing something. So a lot of people were killed for possessing a firearm when they actually just had a wallet in their hand. So I guess as an example, tell me when I have a wallet or a weapon in my hand in the various images. And that is with a well-lit condition. Hopefully that wasn't too obvious for you. With stress on the mind, stress tends to make us tunnel vision, to the point where when we are stressed and paying attention to something, we literally cannot see outside of that, and our memory distorts itself. Our body has a bunch of weird reactions. Basically assume you're drunk when you're making a decision while stressed. While my footage might not be able to get to 0.2 seconds, Malcolm Gladwell found that most officers could not successfully identify the item in time. So a lot of the time, they went to reading people's faces, reading hostility, or trying to read intent, which brought up how good is their training at reading people's intent or facial expression. Most judges, policemen, and people tend to look at someone, talk to someone, and feel like they know someone better or understand someone deeper after they've spoken to them. What's the point of interviews if that's not the case? Anyone who's been in an interview likes to look at someone's face and try and get a read on who they are as a character, as a person. And from that interview, we think we get some insight into them. Statistically, that's not actually that true. A lot of people who meet famous leaders are actually overwhelmed by their charm. We tend to seem to look towards that. Neville Chamberlain went to meet Hitler to see if he was a threat to Britain before World War II. After meeting the man, he came to the conclusion that he wasn't. Winston Churchill looked at the statistics and said there is no way Hitler is doing this without a plan to invade. One man knew Hitler and came to the wrong choice. In fact, many men knew Hitler and came to the wrong choice in the British Parliament. Winston Churchill didn't and came to the right choice through statistics alone. Meeting people might be a way to deceive ourselves. Malcolm Gladwell looked further into it and found that transparency as taught to police might be too stereotypical. He compared multiple systems of training people to look at people, and he found that FACS, F-A-C-S, is a system that's more mathematical at looking at the slight movements of the face. And that one might be a good way of measuring people without cultural context. However, you still need to interpret if they are feeling angry, what that anger means. What is the context of that anger? Do you give someone the benefit of the doubt, or do you assume the worst? If you are a black person who is used to not trusting the police, and you are angry because you have been pulled over for pulling a stoplight, does the policeman register that anger as something that's cultural, or do they register that anger as something hostile? And it looks like it might be hostile. However, that's even assuming that they read the face right. The transparency techniques that the police are caught, which is just the name of the program that they use to learn faces. Malcolm Gladwell seems to compare police transparency programs to the equivalent of watching Friends on TV and deciding that the actor's performance is the correct way to interpret those emotions, when those emotions have been intentionally smoothed over to sell to a specific market. And those types of transparency have actually been tested in other countries, such as Germany or Vietnam, and people do not read the emotions the same way. FACS is probably a better system. It's also a much harder and more rigorous system. The transparency technique, as taught by American police officers, thus has a strong possibility to mismatch the emotion that is actually going on by misreading what is going on in the people's face, especially from a cultural context. This means that if you're a weirdo, or you're from another culture, or you've trained yourself to react to a specific emotion in a specific way, or a specific situation, you will probably be able to at least cause confusion in the police officer if they are reading you in a crucial situation. And that's a little terrifying, because it means that you are incentivized to conform, if what Malcolm Gladwell is saying is true. Finally, at the end, Malcolm Gladwell seems to tie it all together in the story of Sandra Bland, a Illinois woman who drove to Texas to start a new life after a bunch of terrible events happened in her life. She had already gotten $8,000 worth of tickets, which had hurt her life significantly, and she got pulled over for a routine traffic stop. She was angry at the police officer, and the police officer just wanted to see what was up, where she was from, and he started to be a little hostile towards her. She did not give him the respect that he wanted, and he registered her as a threat. He was later fired after arresting her for not turning on the signal, as Sandra Bland said. For him, it was a lawful arrest and her resisting arrest. Sandra Bland was found dead in her cell 3 days later, having hung herself. She may have had mental illness or personal issues, and this stress may have pushed her over the edge. While the police officer was later fired for incompetence, Malcolm Gladwell argues that this officer was doing exactly what he was trained to do, and he's kind of being thrown under the bus. The procedure needs to be more regional specific, and perhaps a little better at reading people. We might think that the procedures that we have in place work a lot better than they actually are when they are causing severe damage to the way that society is glued together. And if they returned to a trust-first function instead of a distrust-first function, then Malcolm Gladwell seems to think things would improve a little bit more. And that's what I got from talking to strangers. If you are interested in a book like this, please check it out. And I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, everyone.